Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Take30 special event on data protection with the Data Advisor. My name is Jeff Spear, I run the information management practice, and today we're doing episode 1 of this series on data protection, talking about hybrid cloud protection. We've got 4 more episodes coming up the same time in June, same day, listed down on the left. And then don't forget, on Thursdays, we've got our standard Take30 series. This month, we've got some highlights from the Microsoft Application Summit, and then some future ones on data strategy, the modern analytics framework, and approach to cognitive analytics. So please join all of those, and Debbie will be putting the link to register in the chat. So hope to see you all at all of those. And with that said, I'll pass it over to Maxina and Nicole to talk about security.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Nicole Payne, and I'm going to pass it over to Maxina.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maxina Melger. I am a cybersecurity tech specialist in the distribution, or what we call consumer and travel and transportation market within segment 1 accounts at IBM. And this is the not if but when, how to mitigate risk around sensitive data. I wanted to kind of give you just an overview again of what I believe Maggie spoke to you about last time around Guardium. And Guardium is a suite of products that IBM utilizes for the purposes of data security. And it provides you the ability to discover and classify your sensitive data, to do analysis on that data and assess risk, to actually protect through policies and monitoring of the who, what, when, where, and how people are accessing that information, and then respond to any threats that you might have. And also we provide out of the box policies, reports, classifications, for the purposes of regulatory and compliance sake. So things like CCPA, GDPR, we provide those out of the box. I call it an 80-20 rule. You provide your list of sensitive objects, your user IDs, privileged user account IDs, your database server names, things like that. But we have the policies already out for you, and then you can of course modify those in any way, shape, or form that you want to. So just kind of to give you context, and now we'll get into what we're actually going to be talking about today. So again, this is episode 1 of what we call our Data Defense Roadshow, and what we've done is we've come up with this entire format of what we call a roadshow, where we sit down and we have 5 use cases that we feel are important that our customers are talking about, and those are here. We're going to be talking about hybrid cloud protection today, but in the following weeks, you'll see uncovering threats, encryption and ransomware, which of course is a very hot topic today, risk-based approach, how do you determine risk, and privacy and compliance. And the intent of these roadshows was to take what we formerly had as what we called our proof of technology, where we let people sit down and work through building a policy, building a report, doing a classification, and bring it up a level where people could actually see use cases that would be relevant for their environment, for their management team, kind of bringing everything up a level for them. So again, the first one we're going to do today is hybrid cloud protection. So let's go to the next slide. As a format, what we generally do is we ask a series of questions before each of these use cases, just to kind of get conversations going. So when we do these, whether they're virtual or in person, we like to make it very much a conversation between our customers as well as ourselves around these different areas. So that's why you'll see these questions that we come up with and we start this conversation going. In this particular instance, for the hybrid cloud use case, we ask if they have any corporate data governance initiatives within their environment. Of course, we'll get a lot of different answers from that. Some people are very mature in that model. Some people are very less mature in that they're just getting started. And you'll be very surprised that some of these large, very large retailers or airlines and where they might be in that maturity model. Secondly, do you have siloed business units that are building their own systems in a vacuum? So do you have shadow IT within your environment? That's kind of one of those questions where, generally speaking, everybody always agrees to that, and we start a really interesting discussion around that. Next is, do you know where all of your data resides? And of course, I always say if someone answers yes to that, they're kind of living in a vacuum themselves, because my experience doing this for many, many decades, especially around the data side of things, is that people are building their own systems off their enterprise data warehouses just because it's easier for them to get their work done. So data proliferates everywhere. And now with business units just building their own systems in the cloud and not even having to go through the IT operations team, it's even more of a problem. So for this use case, we're talking about a situation where we have a SOC team that sees something interesting being sent from Guardium to, in this case, to Radar. Now, it could be any SIM that Guardium is sending this alert to. But one of the things to understand about utilizing Guardium for alerting into your SOC and your SIM is that generally people will just send all information about everything everyone's doing into the SIM. It's a lot of information and a lot of it is not relevant. What we allow you to do is send only those alerts that are really important for someone to act upon. So Guardium can determine, hey, I've got this user Lord1 that is doing some suspicious stuff. I probably need to send it over to the SOC team, and in this case, to QRadar. Now the SOC team can take a look at that and say, when Guardium sends me something, it's important. It's something I need to act upon. I need to look into it. So in this case, we see something from Lord1 that has occurred. So we want to get into it in more detail here and take a look at what exactly it was that Guardium saw. So all of this information that you see here is information that Guardium saw and sent to QRadar. So here we have the IP address, the description of it, the username, which is important, Lord1. We see the description, GDP privileged user accessing sensitive data. And then QRadar is telling us what the magnitude of that is as well. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail. And here we have even more information. We see the actual SQL command that was executed. So this user, Lord1, did a select star from payroll.directdepositinfo. That is pretty critical information, and anyone doing a select star is somewhat suspicious. And we even see on the side the sensitive object group that they executed it from. So now the SOC team goes back to the Guardium team. So here we've got people working together to try and do some forensics around what exactly occurred. So here we want to look at everything that Lord1's been doing. And here we see he's been very active. Notice he's really accessing a lot of payroll information, employee salary information. And in every instance, we can see the SQL that he's executing is the full SQL that he executed, which in this case selects star on everything. We see that he did a local connection because the client IP is the same as the server IP. That means that he logged directly into that database server in order to gain access to this data. And we see at the title of the report, this particular information is LUW, or is what we call it IBM, Linux, Unix, Windows report. So these are DB2 systems sitting on a Linux server or Unix server somewhere. So if we look at it in a little bit more detail, because of course we are a organization with data all over the place, right? We have the Linux, Unix, Windows on-prem. We also have data in Z. So here we are looking at the report specifically around the systems on our mainframes and what's going on there. And here we see that Lord 1 has been unloading table spaces, which means he's pulling data out of those systems, credit card information. And we need to look at more information and see where else he might be accessing data. So now enterprise-wide, we know we have this user that we need to take a look at in more detail. The things with Guardium is it's not just one environment, right? We have solutions for mainframes, for databases that are on-prem or in the cloud. For platform as a service, database as a service, we have those solutions for all of those environments. And then with that, we can push all of that information into these collectors and integrate very easily with these other systems like we saw with QRadar. So it's a holistic approach to enabling security within your environment. So the question becomes, where else could we be exposed? We saw that we were exposed on the Z environment. We have some cloud systems out there. We might be exposed there. How would we handle that? And then we also have files. So we also have Guardium file protection that could actually crawl into your file shares, search for sensitive data, and do exactly what you're doing with Guardium data protection, building policies and things like that around it. Okay, so Nicole, let's get into a little demonstration of how we actually do this in these hybrid cloud environments. So this is the Guardium data protection splash screen. Based on roles and privileges, you may or may not see all of this, right? But let's take a look at how we have things set up in AWS here. So let's go over to Manage. And what we want to look at is activity monitoring. And notice here we have STAP controls, but we also have external STAP control. So STAP is a software tap agent that we install on a system where you have access to the operating system, right? It sits there, it's just waiting for actions to occur against the database, and it's seeing what's happening and it's pushing that information to the hardened collector appliance for it to be processed. In the case of database as a service, things like RDS, or if you're in Azure or Google Cloud, we can't always do that. We can't install the agent on the operating system. So we've come up with what we call an external STAP. So let's take a look at the external STAP. And here we see we have a MySQL system out there sitting in AWS. Let's select that and let's take a look at the actual information around that system. And here we see the database host name is RDS on Amazon. So now if we go and we go to our RDS console, we'll be able to actually see, there it is, RDS Amazon AWS. So we're sitting out there in AWS as well, and we can see it both on the Guardium side, but yes, it's working, it's looking at the data, but we can also see it here within the AWS console. So let's go back into Guardium and look at a little bit more detail at the collector. And here we're going to see the IP information about, you know, which host we're actually talking to. Now, if we go back up into instances in Amazon, we're going to see that's the particular IP address that we have there, 52.52.85.4. So we actually have something running out there, again, within AWS. So now let's hop back in and take a little bit deeper look into the architecture of how we do that. So cloud architecture, if you were doing infrastructure as a service and you were able to install and maintain your own operating system and database server, you would do it just like you would do it on-prem, right? You would just install a software tab in that binary sitting out in the cloud, and you'd have a collector sitting probably in the cloud environment for latency sake for networking, but you wouldn't have to. But for something that's database as a service, we had to take a different approach. So what we do is we enable these external S tabs that sit in front of the database itself. So in front of that database as a service. And now anything that's coming through to access that database will first go through that external S tab, and then it will go into the database service itself. Through that, we are able to capture all activity and all connections to that database. And just like we do it with an on-prem system or an infrastructure as a service, we are still taking all of that information and pushing it into a collector appliance where it will get parsed into our repository for the purposes of reporting and alerting. Next slide. And these are all containerized systems as well when we're talking about cloud environments. The other option that you have is to utilize native logs. And in some cases, we had clients years ago who said, I trust AWS, I trust what they're giving to me, I have an Oracle system, I just want to consume those logs into the collector so that for compliance sake, I have all the information in one location. So for certain varieties of databases, we allow you to do that as well. Your next option would be to actually utilize the streaming or event hub from things like AWS and Azure. So in this case, what we're doing is we are consuming those streams and those event hubs from those cloud providers. And we are, of course, limited to the information that they provide us. We can't add any contextual information around that. But at least if you have that information, we can consume it, put it into the Guardium collector. And again, you'll have all of that information that you might require for the purposes of compliance. And next slide. Our next option, which we came out with, I believe it was in 11.2, is the concept of universal connectors. So this is us being able to consume native audit logs. So if you decide, again, for the purposes of compliance or your business case is such that you already have these logs out there and you can't install anything on that system, we have this universal connector which allows you to pull those audit logs within the universal connector, and then the sniffer, which the sniffer is the portion of Guardium that does all the hard work about understanding where to put all of this data within the repository, will understand those native audit logs and put those in the right location for you. So again, we capture all of the information that you would have within the native log, and we're pushing it down into our repository. So yet again, you have all the information that you need from that. Now, the universal connectors are things that we built because there's so many systems coming out, especially as you talk about cloud, that it was hard for us to keep up. So we actually have partners who have been building connectors for us, like Snowflake, things that we have on the roadmap to build maybe an STAP or ETAP for, but we haven't been able to get to it. You can actually write your own. It's very easy. It's an open API, and customers could write these themselves. So the idea down here is you have options, right? Depending on what the business case is and depending on what the application allows, you have the option of doing an STAP for real-time monitoring of on-prem or cloud-based systems where it is infrastructure as a service and you can actually load stuff and install stuff within the operating system itself. Then we have ETAP for, yet again, monitoring of database as a service systems where you can't install anything on there, but you still need to have that full look into who's doing what with our data and being able to potentially take action on some of that. And then we have Agentless for passive monitoring. Again, you're not going to be able to do anything real time with that. Everything will be after the fact, but you'll still have the information and you'll get it in a timely fashion. And then API streaming, again, from those cloud sources if you require that. So I guess the message here is, depending on the environment that you're within, depending on the application, we again have options for you. And with that, I would turn it over to questions.
All right. Thanks very much, Maxina. The first question we have is, I guess, could you go over if you see a user doing something suspicious in Guardium, what are my options? What can I do about it?
Good question. So you can do nothing and just alert on that and have somebody take a look at it later. Or you have the option to do blocking. You could do quarantining. So something like failed user of Nicole coming in, however many attempts and failures during so many seconds, I can quarantine for however long I want to. You could also do rewrites. So in the case of, we saw Lord One doing a lot of select stars, we could have on the back end written a policy that whenever we see a select star, we rewrite that. And we do a select that only allows them to grab the first 1,000 rows within a table. Those are very specific instances, and it's not something that we see customers doing quite often because you really have to be careful about that. You need to have some conversation around that. You don't want to just be randomly blocking people. But certainly you could block if someone's coming from an unknown IP address at a different time of day from an unknown source program. There's all kinds of options there.
Great, thank you. The next question is, you talked about the universal connector. Does that work for container instances?
Yes, it works for anything. Because all you're doing is pushing the logs into the universal connector, and then the universal connector has the APIs built around it for the sniffer. So. Okay,
great. Thank you. There was a question about the details on the ETAP. Could you describe more how it works and if it's similar to a proxy?
It is, actually. It's taking a proxy approach where we're sitting in front of the database as a service system. So all of your applications now would have to come through that ETAP and connect through the ETAP to connect to that database. And the reality is, you are not going to have people logging into the database server locally because you don't have the ability to do that in a database as a service environment. So you're not as concerned about DBA access on that server itself. They would be coming through, like, let's say, code from a connection string someplace else. So now you just direct it to the ETAP.
Okay, that makes sense. Can Guardium monitor Cloud Pak for data environments?
Yeah. Yeah, so Guardium is the solution for Cloud Pak for data for data security.
Excellent. The last question we have is, you're using the example of select stars for security alerts. My data scientists often do, select stars when they're doing data exploration. Is there a way to further profile it so not every select star triggers an alert?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If your data scientists were coming in, you could do it based on their user ID, right? And say, oh, I know this, and you would have a group of data scientists, right? And you would put their user IDs within that group. And then you could build the policy to do a query rewrite on select star, ignoring those data scientists. So it would allow them to go through and do the work that they would want to do. Very flexible. The policies that you can build are extremely flexible, but we also provide you with something called a policy analyzer, which allows you to kind of test it out and make certain that it's doing what you think it should be doing.
Oh, great. That's good. Yeah, because I know getting things like that tuned right is always difficult.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
All right. Those are all the questions that we have right now, and we're just about at the bottom of the half hour. So I want to thank everyone for attending, and thanks Maxina and Nicole for presenting. Like we said, this is the first of a series coming up in the month of June, so please tune in next week for the next set, and also hopefully we see you all on Thursday for our traditional Take 30s. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.